this tape, which will more than likely be prejudiced towards country western music, with the help of some people like Robert Shelton and Burt Goldblatt, who wrote the book Country Music Story, A History of Country and Western Music. In Country Roots, The Origins of Country Music by Douglas B. Green, as well as Country Music USA by Bill C. Malone, an attempt to bring just a little bit of the history of country western music more into focus for people to better understand some of the history behind the years of country western music. The vaudeville never died. It moved to Nashville, Tennessee. The medicine show, whose glib salesmen hawked patent remedies for every ache and pain of body and spirit, never died. That also just moved to Nashville. The minstrel show, with its outrageous jokes, strewing corn in every comic exchange, never died. It scrubbed the paint off its face and moved to Nashville, Tennessee. Nor did the great American rural traditions of homemade music die in mountain shacks or ranchland campsites. So the fiddle tunes and ballads moved to the music factory called Nashville. There have, of course, been great changes from vaudeville and the medicine minstrel shows of old. The world of country music has become sophisticated far beyond its backwoods origin. Today, Nashville music is performed by skilled musicians, astute businessmen, facile songwriters, powerful promoters, and able technicians. Through the recording and radio microphones pass a form of music, comedy, stage presentation, and personality that reveals as much about the American character as anything to be found on Broadway or in Hollywood. If your entertainment tastes have been formed by songs, films, show, and nightclubs at Broadway or Hollywood, it may come as a surprise to you that America has two major popular musics. You will be familiar with the tunes and lyrics of Tin Pan Alley, but from Nashville's Tin Pan Valley comes another type of popular music. Western music, hillbilly, ballads, weepers, heart songs, bluegrass, rockabilly, cowboy event songs, breakdowns, folk songs, songs of the trail, ranch house tunes, sacred, blues, gospel, mountain, old time, western swing, hoedowns, and goes on and on. Country music is generally made on stringed instruments, guitar, banjo, mandolin, autoharp, fiddle, rather than on the saxophone, brasses, pianos, and percussion of city popular music. It also seems to employ a distinctive twang which seems, or attempts to seem, as if it rose out of the gullies, flatlands, swamps, deserts, grazing grounds, or farmlands of rural America. And to the 35 million fans of country western music, there's a total different galaxy of stars than there is to the followers of the Broadway Hollywood axis. For the readers who have not encountered the color and beauty of country music, I hope this tape will persuade you to take off the bandages of prejudice that have covered your ears and eyes. More complexity and more artistic beauty and truth have been expressed in country music than you might imagine. If a few thousand readers who have dismissed this music as hillbilly corn can be impelled to listen with more sympathy, the work will have achieved its goal. I will try on this tape to summarize the 40-year history of country music. 50 years, actually, of country music. Its growth through radio and phonograph, development of styles of songwriters, personalities of those who produce and sing the music, and try, in other words, to put together the beginning of a survey of country music. So many thousands of professionals and thousands of amateur country musicians have been involved in this trend of music that selectivity has to be exerted continually. Two of the most convincing reasons for serious consideration of country music as part of the American heritage have been provided by the administration of President Lyndon Johnson. The Johnsons, true to their Texas roots, are country music fans and have frequently indicated their love of this music. Country and Western music has spread too far into the rural areas of America to be pinpointed to any one area. But American folk music and the hillbilly and commercial country music that grew out of it found one of its richest sources in the hills of Appalachia, a 10-state area where poverty had been a particular heavy burden. In these mountains, the roots sank deeply. Even Tennessee, where the country music industry finally centered, is the nation's fourth poorest state. Some of this poor man's music has been reflected, as we shall see, in the country music from the Carter's Family Coal Miner Blues to the recent Bill Anderson songs, Poor Folks. The sound of country music has undergone great change in 50 years, from the golden age of the 1920s to the electronic age of the 60s and 70s. The rural electrification program has been so complete that it is difficult to find a country band without some sort of electric amplified instrument. The music has by and large moved from the simple to the more complex. In the beginning was a solo voice. Then a fiddle and a banjo were added. Around 1900 the guitar began to gain popularity. The drift toward a modern, sleek sound in country music has caused endless discussion among music circles. Keeping country music country has been vigorously debated. Much of the change in country music can be explained in two words: Elvis Presley. The musical revolution brought about by the singer from East Tupelo, Mississippi, has haunted Nashville since the mid-50s. Presley's mixture of country songs with a strong beat of Negro rhythm and blues formed a new style called rockabilly. He then carried this further into another new style called rock and roll. The guitar pick and Pied Piper brought millions of city and rural teenagers with him and began to have an effect on the thinking of arrangers, musicians, and recording officials in the country field. Drums were admitted to Grand Ole Opry, and the battle began between tradition and modernity grew in intensity. The stylish picture of country music today is far from clear-cut. There are a dozen ways of singing and playing. Often one star will mix many of these styles in the course of several songs. It is possible to find traits of talking blues style in the 1920s in Jimmy Dean's Big Bad John and Roger Miller's Dang Me or Chug-a-Lug. It is possible to find echoes of Rogers, Williams, Cash singing in some of the work of Stonewall Jackson, Buck Owens, George Jones, and Bill Anderson. One can even discern some few remnants of the great women's voices of Molly O'Day, Cousin Emmy, and Rose Maddox in the singing of Kitty Wells and Loretta Lynn. The debate will continue, as it always has in music circles, between traditionalists and modernists. Country music has been making tremendous inroads among listeners in American cities in the last decade. 4 main reasons can be advanced for this trend. Number 1, the organized effort of the country music industry to broaden its influence and audience. Such trade groups as the 7-year-old Country Music Association have taken the lead in approaching advertisers and others for spurring country music programming on radio and television and in personal appearances. Number 2, the continuing declining spiral of quality in the content of Tin Pan Alley music. Increasingly, thoughtful commentators have indicated how popular music taste in America is dominated by a teenage audience of single record buyers and by a handful of powerful disc jockeys who manipulate tastes as if they were playing chess. And number 3, the major shift in population caused by World War II. To serve in defense industry, hundreds of thousands of rural and small-town residents headed toward the exploding urban centers of the Northeast, Midwest, and then Far West. The shift from agrarian to an industrial economy drained away the youth of the countryside. The number of Southerners who have resettled in Chicago, Detroit, and Los Angeles is staggeringly large. But these immigrants took their cultural luggage with them. The longing for the good old days and the good old music of their childhood has remained pervasive. Number 4, the growing disenchantment of city people with the impersonality, ruthlessness, alienation, and loneliness of city life. This has stoked a hunger for a better set of values, for a link to the past that has continued to grow as metropolises and to grow into megalopolises. such as the one spreading down the East Coast from Boston to Washington. How many city youths are still hypnotized in fiction, film, and television shows by such heroes of American life as the cowboy and the drifter? The hunger for personal freedom has grown even stronger in an automated society. This has reflected itself in tremendous post-war boom for do-it-yourself carpentry and do-it-yourself music of the folk and country variety. Thousands of city and college youngsters in the last decade have taken on a strange identification with rural folkways. The self-reliant backwoodsman, the pioneer, the cowboy, the hobo, the wandering minstrel, the man who could rule his own life, not have it ruled for him by IBM machines and computers. For these reasons, country music has been making inroads on the city audience. It is a trend that can only grow, despite fads such as the British invasion of rock and rollers. Some of the greatest irony of the post-war years has been not that the city person has longed for the vanishing country, but that the country person has longed for the benefits of city living. Who would deny that there are material improvements that can and should be sought? But what gets lost in the process are values. Gradually, country isolation has broken down. Highways poked their concrete fingers into mountain pockets. Television waves crossed their ridges and took Broadway and Hollywood faces, speech, and taste into the backcountry. The Associated Press wires out of New York and Washington brought the same news at the same time to Bismarck, North Dakota, and Deep Fork, North Carolina. Thus, the American countryside is gradually becoming urbanized, falling sway to the advertising of national magazines, the commercials of national television. Inevitably, the music of the country must reflect this breakdown of rural-urban walls. The smoothness, the slickness, the polish of the city is gradually changing the beautiful, rough, natural sounds of old-time country singers. A factory-made table is the new serving board, replacing the fine old early American table. Only a hopeless romantic would say forward to the sweet tranquility of yesterday on every level, but it is not hopeless romanticism that finds beauty in old songs, old truths, old poems, and old fiddles. Country people play their feeling and feel their playing. This then is the story of American country music, a crazy quilt pattern of 50 years of singing, playing, joking, tale-telling, dancing, and reminiscing. It should be played out not in words, but with a soundtrack. That soundtrack would have some of the most beautiful melodies and some of the roughest sounds in American music. It would be the clanging of electric guitar, the subtle fretting of Merle Travis's unamplified guitar, the stirring, piercing Gloryland March of Wilma Lee and Stoney Cooper, the yodeling of Kenny Roberts, the devilish banjo tricks of Don Reno, the clunk of String Bean's old banjo, Pappy McMichael's bow sliding across his 1723 Italian violin, which he has to call a fiddle. Johnny Cash pointing his guitar at an audience as if he were going to hold him up. A screaming howdy from beneath Cousin Minnie Pearl's straw hat. Jimmy Wakely singing to his horse. Zeke Clements explaining how to skin a cat to get a banjo skin. Archie Campbell telling a racy story one minute and singing a gospel song the next. Ralph Peer telling rustic auditioners in a hotel room to relax and sing out. Ernest Tubb speaking like a benign Lincoln in a 10-gallon hat. Hank Williams crying his lonesome words into a microphone. Jimmy Rogers hearing a railroad whistle in the night. It is a rare and exciting sound. Country music. The name means so much and so little. It is as specific for one person as it is vague for another, covering too much territory for some and not enough for others. Some see it as the hard-living songs of a hard-living people, some as the cry of a socially and financially oppressed minority, others as the voice of a strong but silent majority, and still others as the soul of a land and a region. It is all these and much more. It is a giant, and until recently, often neglected tree whose roots into the fertile ground of time and tradition and culture are long and deep, and whose branches are many, spreading out broadly to cover a great deal of ground. The name itself, country music. Music from, by, about the people of the American countryside. It seems so simple, yet the name endured several complicated evolutions. First, it was old-time tunes. And when A&R man, one who runs a recording session is responsible for matching the entertainers signed by his label with many of the tunes recorded, named Ralph Peer, asked a young fiddler named Al Hopkins what he called his band, the reply was, Call the band anything you want. We're just a bunch of hillbillies from North Carolina and Virginia anyway. His band then became known as the Hillbillies, and the record industry, picking up the cue, began calling it hillbilly music. Hillbilly was almost always distasteful to the performers and musicians, who craved a deeper national understanding and certainly greater respect for their music and the music business. Billboard, one of industry's major magazines carrying the charts as well as industry news items, flirted briefly with folk for southeastern music and hot bands for western swing, before encompassing it all under the term country and western, which soon was abbreviated to C&W. The evolution of the name is easier to describe than the evolution of the music itself, for it is basically an ancient music, rooted in heady mixture of cultures and peoples. Instrumentalists were much scarcer than singers in those far-off days, when over 2,000 years ago the Anglo-Saxons drove the Celts into the hinterlands that were to become Scotland and Ireland. The retreating people took with them their bagpipes, the musical traces of which still can be heard in a droning fiddle break or a lonesome modal banjo tune. In fact, Ben Campbell played his own bagpipes in his recent hit recording of Bonaparte's Retreat. But bagpipe players were few and far between, and while instrumental talent existed, the instruments did not. In about 1550, the violin as we know it was developed, and thereafter spread northward from its native Italy with surprising speed. Soon the people of relatively remote British Isles began to feel a great kinship towards this instrument, which could be made to sound so much like a bagpipe, and here really, instrumental accompaniment was born in the distant past of what was to become country music. A fiddle was small, light, and although fragile, easily carried, and to the musically oriented, it was the handiest of available and versatile instruments to take aboard ship when crossing the rough Atlantic to that new land of unlimited opportunities and endless forests called America. Fiddles came over with the earliest settlers and became a firm part of American folk tradition, both in the Northeast and in the South. America's explosive expansion after the War of Independence left pockets of culture high and dry, particularly in the rugged and inhospitable Appalachians, virtually untouched by passing centuries until the turn of this century, when progress in the mixed blessings of railroads and coal mines came to the isolated dales and hollows of the mountains of Kentucky, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Georgia. Here the isolated mountaineer who played the same fiddle tunes and sang the same ballads as his or her great-great-grandparents was suddenly confronted with a black section worker who laid track throughout the southern highlands and brought with him another small portable instrument called the guitar, which was perfect for the accompaniment of singing, far better than the high-pitched, scratchy, lonesome fiddle. The guitar wasn't entirely unknown in the South before the turn of the century. Andrew Jackson's daughter-in-law bought one as early as 1819, and in 1833, C.F. Martin found enough of a market to justify building his famous guitars. But in those early days, a guitar was considered a refined instrument for proper young ladies to study and perform in the parlor. In fact, several popular tunes of Jackson's day, Fisher's Hornpipe, for example, have filtered down into tradition, musicians thinking of them now as old fiddle tunes. Despite its early use, the guitar had little impact on the rocky, isolated pockets of culture hidden away in the deep Appalachians until the coming of the black section workers, who brought with their guitars an African-based musical style that emphasized rhythm, always severely lacking in Anglo-Celtic musical tradition. It is interesting in this regard to listen to traditional Irish records, both foreign and American Irish, because the vocal style is pure country music, and the haunting melodies are the very heart of most of this music. And even the instruments, fiddle and concertina, sometimes guitar, are well within country music tradition, but there is no rhythm. The singer sings a phrase, pauses, sings another, pauses, and sings yet another. It took the solid, steady rhythm of the black guitarist as taught to white children to move country music away from the ballad tradition and add to it a sound and a feel that particularly characterizes it today. With the spread of the minstrel show in pre- and post-Civil War America came the popularity of the banjo, an instrument of African descent. The sound of the five-string banjo, supposedly invented by Joe Sweeney in 1830, with its high drone string and the fact that it could easily be tuned to play in lonesome-sounding modes, made it a favorite instrument among mountain musicians. As Lester Flatt is fond of recounting, many a band in the early days consisted of nothing but a fiddle and a banjo, usually played in a style alternately called frailing, drop thumb, or claw hammer, which involved ringing the fifth or drone string with the thumb and brushing the others with the finger. Then, too, with the opening of exotic foreign lands to American trade shortly before the turn of the century, a marked faddishness for the unusual overtook American culture. There were also a surge in interest to things Mediterranean, perhaps due to a part of the great wave of immigrants from southern Europeans shortly before the turn of the century. And it was in this manner that the mandolin was introduced, first to classically oriented music, but eventually filtering into the mountains. A furniture maker in Kalamazoo, Michigan, named Orville Gibson, adapted the gourd-shaped Italian mandolin to modern playing, making it flatter and lengthening the scale, which made for a far better sounding and playing instrument. Another fad that was to have enormous effect on country western music was the interest in the Hawaiian Islands, which came under U.S. control in 1898. The haunting music of these islands, which, like most Polynesian music, is surprisingly but extremely western in tone, scale, and harmony, and it didn't take long before the sounds of the ukulele and the Hawaiian guitar were commonplace in vaudeville troupes and other touring shows. By the mid-1930s, the instrument, always rather quiet, its sound being directed upward, not out, was electrified and played through small amplifiers. Thus it became known, synonymous with a steel guitar. It became one of the symbolic instruments of country western music. Much of the same attitude in tracing back the country western origins prevailed in the recording end of the music business. The Carter family and Jimmy Rogers, who first recorded for Victor Records within days of each other in 1927, both emphasized the traditional musical virtues of their respective regions. Rogers, the sentimental ballads and black-influenced blues of central Mississippi. The Carter family, the straight-laced, stiff-backed, religious-oriented music of the deepest Appalachian hollows. Also recorded at that time was a blind singer with a big, rough-hewn voice, so charged with emotion it sounded like he was shouting to God from a mountaintop. His name was Alfred Carnes, and he later disappeared back into the hills, never to be heard from again. The date of these famous recording sessions conducted by Ralph Peer on August 2nd to 4th, 1927 is a monumental one in the history of country music, but there were recordings of country music, bands and songs, and even a million-selling record predating Peer's landmark sessions. It is generally thought that Eck Robertson was the first country musician to have been recorded, fiddling Sally Goodman, an Arkansas traveler, for Victor in 1922. Then in 1925, a moderately successful light opera singer, who since as early as 1916 had occasionally been recording sentimental tunes like Can't You Hear Me Calling, Caroline, tried his hand at a country song, and his two-sided hit, The Prisoner's Song and The Wreck of Old 97, became in all probability the first million-selling record of all time. He was Vernon Dalhart, and it might well be that he sold more records than any other country singer, for he recorded for a wide variety of labels, utilizing well over 100 aliases. In fact, the name Vernon Dalhart is itself yet another alias for Marion Tri Slaughter, a Texan who chose the names of two nearby towns in the Lone Star State, Vernon and Dalhart, for his stage name. Although he was the first hillbilly star in the national sense, Dalhart's true home territory was the New York stage, and this fact, combined with the overpowering number of names he recorded under and labels on which he appeared, has led to neglect of the memory of this man. His recordings with fiddle, harmonica, and guitar sound a bit stiff, but are just as country as anything else of the period. His sound, for all his activity in light opera and the New York stage, was on record distinctively and decidedly country, a fact often overlooked today. The movement towards newer song material did not occur just overnight. Carson Robinson had been writing songs with success since the middle 1920s, as had another New York-based writer, Bob Miller. Jimmy Rogers relied heavily on new material, much of it from the pen of his sister-in-law, Elsie McWilliams, and even the Prisoner song was a recent composition in its time. But as the 1930s moved on, clearly country music style was shifting away from loose fiddle bands towards solo performers who wrote, or were at least able to come up with material of their own, like Gene Autry and Jimmy Davis. It was during this era that country music began developing its many commercial branches, reaching out for different segments of a constant audience and for new audiences as well. Singing cowboys began to come to the fore in imitation of Gene Autry, and southwestern dance bands like Bob Wills and his Texas Playboys attracted new audiences in dance halls and on record. Yet the Southeast, for whatever reason, tended to remain musically conservative, more traditional, and the changes that came over the business and the music in general came more slowly in that region. The Grand Ole Opry, for instance, hired only 2 singing groups in the early 30s, the Vagabonds and Delmore Brothers, before finally relenting to Pee Wee King's big cowboy band, the Golden West Cowboys, in 1937. Later, the Opry signed the singers and leaders of tradition-oriented but musically energetic, inventive and refreshing string bands, Roy Acuff in 1938 and Bill Monroe in 1939. Two of the most popular groups of the era were Brothers Act, with the last names Maynor and Monroe. The Maynor is a fiddler named J.E. and a banjo player named Wade, were to lead their own groups by the end of the decade. But while together, their 1936 recording of Maple on the Hill was a huge success, as was What Would You Give in Exchange for Your Soul, by two brothers from Racine, Kentucky, Bill and Charlie Monroe. Although their recording career as a duet lasted only 2 short years, they made a tremendous impact on the history of country music through their fiery musicianship, and Bill eventually went on to develop one of the most popular of country music's subgenres, bluegrass. Women singers in general have had an important role in traditional country music, dating from Sarah and Maybelle Carter through Dolly Parton, who retains much of the traditional country style in her current popular sound, one of the gifted and sensitive few who are able to combine the old and the new. But women singers and musicians in early country music were rare, for if the career of musicians was considered unsavory for men, it was considered unthinkable for women. Traveling in a family band was acceptable, but it took a good many years before women were accepted as solo singers with their own bands. In fact, Kitty Wells, often referred to by the media as the Queen of Country Music, sang off and on as a guest in her husband's popular band Johnny and Jack for about 10 years before she stepped out into the limelight on her own in the early 1950s. Roy Acuff frequently tells a story that illustrates the prevailing feeling toward women in early country music bands in relating how his longtime sidekick, band member, comedian, and tenor singer, Bashful Brother Oswald, got his stage name. It seems that in the early 1940s, Roy hired a banjo-playing comedian named Rachel Veach, who was carefully called Cussin' Rachel, but even so, Acuff began to get fan mail that was extremely negative toward his carrying a young woman on his show. The pressure mounted to a point where Acuff considered dropping Rachel from the act, but he hit upon a solution. He paired Rachel with his comedian and dobro player Pete Kirby, calling them Cussin' Rachel and the Great Big Bashful Brother Oswald, a name that stayed with Kirby long after Rachel Veach left the Smoky Mountain Boys. From that point on, there was no longer any adverse reaction to Rachel's presence from Acuff's loyal fans. As long as it appeared she was in the protective company of her big brother, all was well. Although women singers had on occasion been popular before the war, Louise Macy is an example, as is Patsy Montana, the first woman to have a million-selling record, I Want to Be a Cowboy Sweetheart. It wasn't until the success of Kitty Wells that the field opened up for them. Wells, who took her stage name from an old folk song, her real name is Muriel Deason, sang in a soft, sorrowful voice, as opposed to the exhortative styles of Molly O'Day and William Lee Cooper, and although her voice itself betrayed little emotion, her plaintive tone was and is extremely moving and effective. Beyond this, she was the first important woman singer to tackle in song the issues that so disturbed post-war America: infidelity, divorce, and drinking. Her It Wasn't God That Made Honky-Tonk Angels was but one of the dozens of songs that reflected the trauma of America's post-war return to normalcy. and her willingness to deal frankly with these new and emotion-charged problems, combined with her touching singing style, earned her the title of Queen of Country Music, a title that she should never have to relinquish despite a lack of hit records over the last decade. Kitty Wells not only opened up a new subject matter for the tradition-oriented Southeast, but she paved the way for the acceptance of women singers in general, something that was long overdue in country music. Moreover, she directly influenced the styles of many important women singers who followed her, Loretta Lynn the most prominent.